crush your enemies.
They drew first blood, not me.
See them driven before you.
Oh, my user.
And hear the lamentation of your women.
But I pity the fool.
Glitter in the dark near the 10-house gate.
Oh no.
They're here.
Oh, real light sleeper, child.
Welcome to Vintage Video, where we're rewatching the 80s so you don't have to. We'll be reviewing every major film release of the 1980s in chronological order, overanalyzing what you've seen and spoiling what you haven't. I'm Patrick O'Reilly.
I'm Jesse Bayless.
And I'm Richard Wells.
And today we're discussing Death Watch, released April 1st, 1982. Yes, it was.
Okay.
It was written by David Rayfiel, Bertrand Tavernier, and Gina von Radványi, based on a novel by David Compton, directed by Bertrand Tavernier, and released by Quartet Films in the USA. Taran Killam was born today. Happy birthday, Taran Killam.
So I'm assuming that you were arguing about the release date. Did it have a foreign release first?
Yes.
Okay.
In 1980. But I was making an April 1st joke.
Oh, I thought you were just getting like ahead of all the comments telling you that it was released in 80.
Well, that too. In 1974, David G. Compton's novel The Unsleeping Eye was published, and the UK reprint was retitled The Continuous Catherine Mortenhoe, and then after that it was adapted to the screen, and the book was retitled again to Death Watch to match the film, until a 2016 republication went back to The Continuous Catherine Mortenhoe. The film was shot largely in and around Glasgow, Scotland, and the finished film is dedicated to Jacques Tourneur, the late French director of celebrated films like Cat People and I Walked with a Zombie. The film starts with an original ballad about the death of Catherine Mortenhoe.
Catherine Mortenhoe, she will die for the love of the Golden City.
We get a swelling of erratic strings in the score as we float toward a cemetery under a gray sky. Someone with long red hair stands suddenly at the edge of the graveyard and starts racing between headstones before we cut to a dimly lit hospital. Every room in this movie is dimly lit because they all have the lights off. I don't know if that was a cost-saving initiative. Harvey Keitel, as Roddy Farah, is looking into something resembling optometry equipment as doctors shine colored lights in his eyes and ask if he still has trouble with excessive tears or pain, but he claims to be fine. The doctors recommend Roddy always keep a light source handy. When he asks when the next operation is, they assure him the procedure is complete. Outside the facility, a nurse stops him with a question.
Mr. Farah, why did you let them do that to you?
Let them? This way I'll never forget how pretty you are.
And we cut to a pixelated reverse angle from Roddy's perspective of the nurse looking directly into camera, indicating to us that this operation was to install a camera in his eye that can somehow record what he sees through his own pupils.
Not just record, but transmit
full
video and
resolution to a film format somehow.
Yeah. I feel like they never really explain it. And I get that it's, pseudoscience garbage stuff, but like, I don't understand the light in his eyes. Like, why does he always need to have light? It's such a key point of the story, and yet they never even attempt to explain it.
I think it's literally like he suffers physical pain in darkness, and so they're saying keep a light around because you will need it. Like how a camera needs light to pick up any picture, his eyes need light to not be in physical pain all the time.
But we come to realize it's more than that.
Yeah, there's other problems going on.
Yeah, and while they under-explain that, they over-explain how he sleeps and how he naps and things that he does to keep himself awake.
Yeah.
And this is like, it's like, we're getting too much information here.
Yeah. Across the street, Roddy passes a man collecting signatures in protest against the use of robots in the classroom, with signs demanding, "Protect your children, keep living teachers, march now." Roddy sweeps his eyes along the road, and we see a wide panning shot in his POV as he collects internal second unit footage. He darts his focus back and forth diagonally between two buildings, and we cut to a pair of confused technicians charged with receiving the footage from Roddy's device.
What's he doing?
Yeah. What the hell's going on?
He's having fun.
A sudden third man in the room with them is Vincent Ferriman, played by Harry Dean Stanton. If you haven't caught it by now, there's obviously a running theme of death in most of our character names. The Ballad of Mortenhoe, Mort meaning death, Roddy, a homophone for rotty, like rotting, and Ferriman, obviously derived from the mythical Ferriman, who delivers people to the afterlife, and later we'll meet Harry Graves, so that one's a little more obvious. We hear a woman's voice speaking from the future about Roddy's recollections of this afternoon.
He told me he walked all that first day. Just walked. Doesn't remember where. He didn't come home. Well, why should he? We haven't been together for almost 3 years.
Roddy stops at an intersection to look up at a billboard with a tagline of, "Television did not really exist before Death Watch, the ultimate adventure." We see Roddy at a playground, watching and occasionally pushing kids on swings. After a while, he seems to have enough B-roll of the swing set, and he walks away to join Harry Dean Stanton's Ferriman character, who has just pulled up in a car. Apparently, the camera in Roddy's head is specifically for use on the upcoming live Death Watch broadcast, but the subject of the planned show has just passed away, so they're switching to the next best candidate for the series. Ferriman presents Roddy with her file. She works for a publisher called Computer Book, and from what we see later, it seems to be a line of AI-assisted novels. Like, you pitch a story to the computer, and then if it likes the story you're pitching, it writes the book for you and then publishes it. Roddy and Ferriman hop in Ferriman's car to discuss the woman. Roddy asks how the footage looks so far, and Ferriman says it looks mostly great, but he's stressed because his kid is home from school with a broken arm.
How did you do that?
I did it.
Beating your kids is funny.
I think right up front we're trying to set up, this guy's a monster. Roddy reads out loud a love scene from one of the woman's computer books. Bizarrely, as the car drives past another Death Watch billboard, they are already emblazoned with the face of Romy Schneider playing the film's central character, Katherine Mortenhoe, who hasn't even signed a contract to appear on the show yet. And Roddy asks if he can be there for that part. We cut right to Katherine's doctor's office, where Roddy and Ferriman hide behind a one-way mirror to get footage of Katherine's reaction when her doctor delivers an unfortunate diagnosis.
Okay, but at this point, like, she's not looking at anyone filming her. So
Right.
if you're going through a one-way mirror, just use a regular camera, maybe.
Yeah, that's not necessary, for sure. They start with small talk about her computer AI named Harriet, which co-wrote Katherine's books, but very quickly, Doc brings out the big guns.
Seems you're dying, Katherine.
Hey, just because I forget a few names? What do you mean, it seems I am?
You are dying.
It's like, yeah, I should have been
Yeah.
clearer before. Just my opinion. She welcomes whatever surgical intervention is necessary, but he elaborates that her condition is extremely rare and entirely incurable. He gives her 2 months to live, best case scenario, and she's surprisingly quick to accept his opinion on the case and doesn't even care for him to name the disease, since there's apparently nothing she can do.
Did she go in for, like, did she have a hangnail? Like,
She
why
just
is she
had
here?
tests. She said, I keep getting tested for things. And then it's like, turns out, death. That's what you got.
Yeah, she goes through the stages of grief real quick.
Yeah.
It's like
Homer going through them.
Yeah.
Instantly.
You can expect to go through 5 stages. The first is denial.
No way, because I'm not dying.
Second is anger.
Why, you little...
After that comes fear.
What's after fear? What's after fear?
Bargaining.
Doc, you gotta get me out of this. I'll make it worth your while.
Finally, acceptance.
Well, we all gotta go sometime.
Mr. Simpson, your progress astounds me.
He gives her medication to manage the pain. Behind the mirror, Ferriman explains that Mortenhoe is actually Katherine's first husband's name, and her current husband is Harry Graves. On her way out of the building, Mortenhoe crosses paths with a young man.
Do you have the time, please?
The time?
She's still in shock from her appointment and can't comprehend that the man is asking the actual time of day. Next, we see her in her office with the Harriet machine, which is shooting down several of her story proposals until Katherine lands on something Harriet deems worthy. There's another guy in the scene here whose name and relationship to Katherine is never fully explained, but according to a user-submitted IMDb credit, this is young Bill Nighy.
Oh, really?
That's telling her about how, he thinks the computer's going to reject that story, and then it does. But I didn't hear or see enough of a resemblance to confirm independently that this is Bill Nighy. The science guy-he, as I've always called him. No,
No.
not that one. After venting her frustrations with trusting machines to create all art, she curses out Harriet right to her monitor. Stepping off her bus later, she sees a billboard for Death Watch with her face on it. A balding man named Matheson follows her home and catches her at the door to make her an offer. He works for a larger press outlet and is looking to score an exclusivity contract with interviews and photos for the duration of NTV's Death Watch broadcasts. Katherine tries to turn him down, assuming she can avoid the press with her little remaining time, but the man assures her she will be hounded at every turn by paparazzi fascinated by her rare illness in a world where people no longer die of disease. If she signs his contract, his corporate overlords will keep the cameras at bay.
So another thing they don't really explain. So people aren't dying anymore?
It's the future.
Yeah.
So we just have medicine for everything.
Cool.
Medicine and surgery for everything.
Yeah. I think people are dying, but you die just from extremely old age.
Yeah, I mean, I know that we do see a retirement home or some sort of facility like that later where they keep everybody happy while they're old.
But they do make the point that people still die in the present, even young people, but they die in accidents or in war. They don't die of disease because that we're past that. We have stem cell research and people live until they die of old age or of beheadings, and that's it.
Got it.
The man claims the interviews would amount to a couple hours of work a day.
Until when?
Until you can't anymore. Or you stop making sense.
He's sorry he can't afford to pay what NTV would pay, but she still walks away from the pitch empty-handed. Sometime later, we see Katherine rushing ahead of a crowd of cameras to a house, and inside she finds her husband, Harry Graves. This is her home. She cries in his arms for a moment and then runs to hide elsewhere in the house. He worries she might be trying to kill herself and tracks her down over her own protestations.
Yeah, there's like a weird edit.
Yeah.
Where she leaves the room and then all of a sudden it's him running in a panic.
Yeah, he's freaking out because she closed herself in a room.
I was like, what happened?
But I guess he thought she was taking matters into her own hands because she was so depressed. Sometime later, he mentions that Ferriman reached out to them on behalf of NTV and he wanted to apologize for the billboards that already featured her face in public, announcing her illness to the world without her permission. Katherine asks what they offered for a contract, and her husband claims not to remember exactly before guessing around $500,000. Sensing her disappointment, he assures her he rejected the offer. Back in their editing bay, Roddy and Ferriman review the footage of the swing set, and when it blacks out, Roddy explains that he briefly closed his eyes. Ferriman tells him to blink instead because it won't show up at the frame rate they're recording. It would, though, unless they're doing really low frame rate. Ferriman senses from the footage that Roddy is still having issues tearing up occasionally, but Roddy claims there was just something in his eye. Roddy thinks Katherine will make an incredible subject for the show. Ferriman surprises Roddy by announcing that Katherine is actually here in the building right now, and she's agreeing to sign the NTV contract, or so he assumes. Roddy hides behind a shelf of digital tapes to record her from a distance and keep his own affiliation from the network secret so he can covertly approach her in person for better footage later. Katherine does her best to shame Ferriman for his profession, but as a reality television producer, he is beyond embarrassment. He tells her that people deserve access to her life and that she should put the public before herself.
There are private things.
Are there? Why?
She asks him to confirm that they can't film her incessantly without her express permission, and then leaves again without taking the deal. We cut to Roddy at a hotel bar, taking a handful of pills, and a blonde woman asks him what they were.
They're yellow jackets.
Pardon me?
There's pills.
No.
She confesses to a personal prescription for pills called Beauties, intended to enhance a person's sense of awe. Do you guys recall the last time we saw a blonde woman talking about colorful psychedelic medications with Harvey Keitel?
You want to say Saturn III?
Saturn III.
Oh.
Blues, Blue Dreamers.
Sleeping pills?
You've never heard of blues?
In both cases, Keitel insists they are not sleeping pills.
These are unsleeping pills.
The woman in the hotel bar guesses correctly that Roddy is single and guesses further that he isn't over his previous relationship. She tells him to feel free to hit on her the next time he sees her here.
No matter who I'm with.
The narration from Roddy's ex-wife tells us that Roddy must have taught himself to sleep with his eyes open to avoid disrupting the footage. But he's also taking these pills. So He has all these tools in his arsenal to avoid closing his eyes ever. We see him ringing a doorbell, and a woman named Tracey appears from a side gate to invite him inside. This is Roddy's estranged wife. She also mentions a Roddy Jr. he's been neglecting these last few years. She's concerned about all the procedures he has willingly undergone for his employer. It is weird that he has to keep his eyes open all the time. It's like a camera doesn't have to be running at all times.
Right.
When you're not in a room with her, what's the point of keeping your eyes open constantly?
Yeah.
That's not necessary. We
Like-
don't need to see your bedroom ceiling for the whole night.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I'm assuming that there are just times where no one's watching the feed. It's
Yeah.
not the Truman Show, that they're just not recording or not putting things down.
Well, it's not even going to be live anyways. They're like,
Right. They're airing the shows a few days behind.
Yeah, they're just pre-recording it.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm sure they just cut all this stuff. But then it goes back to, why does he need light all the time?
Right.
I
Exactly.
don't get it.
It started to make me think, though, like, where is the camera installed? Because if it's installed in the optic nerve, then it's just literally reading the light that's coming into the eye. But if it's connected to the brain somehow, it'd be really interesting if, like, he started hallucinating and they're picking it up in the footage because it's after the brain has translated it into an image.
Yeah.
But we don't really dig into that in the film. Spoiler alert. Roddy is quickly driven to shouting by what he perceives as nagging from his wife. Suddenly, he starts groping at her, and they're on their way to making love when it occurs to him that the guys in the editing bay will see all this. He doesn't explain his hesitation, and Tracey asks him to leave. We see Katherine on a walk and panicking. She fumbles for her medication to calm down. From an upstairs bedroom of her home, she watches camera crews assemble in the street below. Even strangers are now recognizing her and photographing her in public. Walking through the park later, she sees a young boy with a soccer ball and kneels in front of him to have a muted conversation. Disturbingly, the boy seen here is the actress's actual son, who would be dead less than a year later at the age of 14 when he accidentally punctured his femoral artery climbing over a spiked fence.
Ugh,
Oh, my God.
that sounds horrible.
Even more disturbingly, for literally every shot of the kid in this movie, he's standing in front of a short, spiked fence.
Ugh.
So it would just be impossible for her to watch this movie. We cut to a wider shot from Roddy's perspective watching Katherine in the park. That night, Katherine senses her husband Harry is on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He can't leave his home, strangers are intercepting their mail, the phone rings all day. She asks if he wants her to sign the contract, but that's actually not what he wants.
I don't want their money.
It would be mine,
Don't sign.
but don't die here.
The next day, Katherine goes to see her father at what looks like an assisted living facility. He's doing a jigsaw puzzle on the floor with another doctor, but when she speaks with him, he doesn't seem to recognize her. He speaks glowingly of his daughter, and Katherine doesn't bother explaining everything. A representative of the facility tells her that, confused as he may seem, he's very happy here, and though he may be dying, it's a peaceful, painless process. He even admits to drugging all the patients to keep them in this pleasant disposition, and she's disgusted by the practice.
Do you miss the misery, Mrs. Mortenhoe?
Yes. And the chance for the possibility of joy.
This isn't the worst way to end a life.
We cut right to Katherine in Ferriman's office agreeing to most of his terms with one request, a $150,000 bump in price.
But take 500,000.
This is the only death I've got to sell.
They meet in the middle at 600,000, or close to the middle, above the middle. And when Ferriman tries to extend the conversation with lunch, she requests payment upfront in cash. Ferriman's office is decorated with a collection of old-school sci-fi and horror film posters, like The Mask of the Red Death, X, the Man with X-Ray Eyes, and later we'll see The Incredible Shrinking Man, The Tall T, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and The Rise and Fall of Legs Diamond. Ferriman agrees to half up front and presents a voucher for travel anywhere in the world. She picks Tasmania because it's fun to say. Before she leaves his office, she suffers extreme chest pain and collapses to the floor. Ferriman quickly phones for Dr. Mason and a medical unit, and she continues breathing raggedly on the floor until he makes a second call, requesting Roddy and a standby crew to at least get footage if she's somehow dying already.
This makes slightly less sense once you've watched the whole movie.
Does it?
Doesn't it?
I mean,
so far it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think she's trying to gauge his reaction, and when
she's testing him to see if he's a man of his word right now.
Yeah, and he reveals his hand especially when he says Dr. Mason,
or more so when he calls a crew in, because the contract that she just agreed to, well, she'll explain right here. She breaks out of the ruse instantaneously and points out that the agreement she just signed does not permit them to film her yet. She has 36 hours before they're even allowed to take a photograph of her.
Right.
We're not supposed to start for 36 hours.
Ferriman is embarrassed to have fallen for the trap, and Katherine is suspicious of the names Ferriman called into his office just now, but not nearly suspicious enough.
I don't think she was suspicious enough when the news reporters were like hounding her before anyone else.
Well,
and then her
think
face was on the thing. Because who told anybody any of this? Because it clearly wasn't her.
I think the doctor told the world because it's news that a young person is dying, and this is a future where we don't have privacy permissions from a medical professional just telling the world, hey, this is what's happening to this person.
So she presumably thinks that the doctor told is it NTC?
Well, the doctor told the press, and when NTV found out about it, they decided we're going to make a documentary series about this because that's incredible.
So that's what she's assuming happened.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
But she knows that they can't film her without her permission for some reason. There's some things they're allowed to do in this universe, and there's some things they're definitely not allowed to do.
I think the permission is to come
for
into
exclusivity.
Coming into her home and into her life. They can film her on the street all they want.
Right, when she's in public, but in private, they would need her permission. Katherine is suspicious of the names Ferriman called into his office just now, but not nearly suspicious enough.
How do you know Dr. Mason?
He's my family doctor.
I just watched Joe versus the Volcano with the kids a couple days ago, and her whole situation is screaming brain cloud to me.
Brain cloud. What is a brain cloud?
Dr. Ellison said I was only going to win it.
So some quack told you what you... Dr. Ellison?
Yeah.
That's my father's doctor.
He is?
Dr. Ellison doesn't have any other patients. My father owns Dr. Ellison.
But why would he...
He set you up.
The next day, Katherine gives her husband the voucher for the cash. While he cashes it in, Katherine is immediately swarmed by autograph hounds. Roddy watches from a distance. Harry and Katherine hop into a limo driven by their handler, played by Robbie Coltrane, and they're given 36 hours to spend unlimited funds around town for their trip to Tasmania.
I have to say, this is the skinniest I've ever seen Robbie Coltrane.
It's because it's the first appearance on film of the man.
Is it his first?
Technically speaking, for us, we saw him loading Flash Gordon's luggage onto a plane, but that came out in 1980. So did this technically overseas. So I don't know by first release date which one got to theaters first or which one shot first. I don't know.
Sure.
They pop into a small shop on the edge of town, and Katherine takes some new dresses to a changing room.
I wouldn't call this a shop.
It's like a flea market.
It's like a flea market.
Yeah. But it's like you can literally spend as much as you want at Rodeo Drive, and it's like, all right, cool. I'm going to go to this gypsy shack.
Yeah. It's because there's like just people making food inside. And
like the woman at the front desk like won't even give her a price on things. She's just like, just give me your coat. It's just like, this is just a barter system here.
That's what money is for. It's to barter with.
But it's also an indicator for us of like the situation in this universe that there's bad shit going on.
Yeah.
And there's like a very large lower class that are being forced to live in tents by the river.
It's possible that they aren't even legally in the country because we'll meet characters later who said we're not even supposed to be in this country.
Yeah. After waiting too long outside, their handler, Robbie Coltrane, enters the store in search of Katherine, and Harry points him to the dressing rooms, but she's already long gone by then. We see her racing along the coastline past several homeless encampments as she stops at the docks looking down on some boats in the water.
So this, I had to rewind it and watch it like 2 or 3 times because it's really incredible. It's
whole set on the patio?
It's a 2-minute uncut shot
of her running.
Of Robbie Coltrane running through the flea market and her running away. The camera never cuts. Mm-hmm. It's moving in and out of structures.
That's great.
So the light's going up and down. Focus is changing. It's behind Robbie Coltrane. It's in front of him. It's like going through crowds of people. It's like, holy crap. How did they... I don't know how they did this.
I didn't even notice it was all one shot. I'm going to have to look back at that.
Yeah, it's like almost 2 full minutes.
Wow. We cut to Roddy alone in a dark restaurant, and ironically or unironically, I can't tell, he performs a bit of product placement by holding up a ketchup bottle for his camera eye, or camera eyes.
Commercial break. Now we pause for a few brief words from our sponsors. Stay with us. Be right back.
He's joined eventually by Ferriman, who passes off a printed announcement of his own daughter's wedding. Apparently they're no longer in touch, and he didn't even know she was engaged. This guy's a monster.
Yeah.
He breaks his son's arm. He's not on speaking terms with his daughter. Ferriman also informs Roddy that the escaped Katherine Mortenhoe has been located, so I'm guessing there was a time jump between these two shots also.
Where?
Gate switch.
Almost got loose. This lady won't die easily, Vince.
I know. She's perfect for us.
We cut now to a crowded church boarding house full of bunk beds. Roddy walks in just before lights out with a knapsack over his shoulder. He spots Katherine Mortenhoe sitting on a bottom bunk in a wig and threatens a man on a nearby bed so he can keep a close eye on her.
Do you remember the last time we were in a crowded church shelter?
The Omega Man?
It did have Charlton Heston.
Oh, not the Omega Man.
The Omega Man.
Oh, duh. Soylent Green.
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. In the Omega Man, he dies in like a fountain.
That's right, yeah. Before the man in the bed even refuses to move, Roddy is offering to break his nose with a karate chop, and the guy silently shuffles away. In the middle of the night, Katherine suffers some kind of seizure in her sleep, and Roddy is shining a flashlight in his own eyes on the top bunk when he hears her suffering. He tries to comfort her with spring water. She asks him why he's even up so late.
Don't you sleep?
I need to get rocked.
He holds her tight and helps her back to sleep, and then returns to his bed. The next day, he checks in with Ferriman to see how the footage looked from the night before. By the time he gets back to the bunk beds, her stuff is all packed. He finds her in the cafeteria, eating next to the same guy whose nose he threatened to break, and the guy stands to give Roddy his seat without talking. The priest announces they will soon be collecting fingerprints because this hospitality is a one-time use program. When they all turn in their fingerprint cards, Roddy stamps 2 and slips one to Katherine so she doesn't have to identify herself here.
So there's one-time use. They must not have advanced enough technology to check them, because in theory, he hands one in and then she hands the exact same one again.
Yeah, but I think the point is just that they're going to scan all these today, and if you try and do it again, then we're going to arrest you.
But wouldn't you then fingerprint them on the way in?
Yeah, and if they're going to scan them all today, they would see the same person was there twice and arrest him. Outside, she asks why he did that, but he doesn't really answer the question. She introduces herself as Kate, her actual name, which I probably wouldn't do on the run, and he says he's Roddy.
His actual name.
And I was worried that she would recognize it from when Ferriman said it in his office when she faked her seizure, but I guess in this universe, Roddy is a perfectly cromulent name. They board a bus together, and she puts on sunglasses to disguise herself when she finds the bus's interior wallpapered with Death Watch advertisements featuring her face. He tries to make a bit of small talk, but she responds by asking a straightforward favor.
There's never any heat on the buses. Except in the summertime.
Can you get me out of here, please?
On the edge of town, we see horse-drawn wagons and burnt-out VW bugs. As they walk the streets, they come upon a brawl between teams of protesters and try to race through it to avoid approaching police. Unfortunately, Roddy becomes entangled in the fight, and an older woman steps up behind Katherine to invite her to the safety of her apartment. Katherine is worried about her friend Roddy back in the fight, and we cut to Roddy being thrown into solitary confinement that night when he has no proof of ID on him. He panics in the dark cell without a flashlight to shine in his eyes because the darkness seems to cause him intense pain. He screams to a guard to return his flashlight, but instead the man flicks on the lights in his cell, and Roddy is relieved.
I wasn't sure if this was pain or just the fear of what happens when it's too dark for too long.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't tell, but it seems like he's like hyperventilating, panicked, terrified. So it doesn't seem like it's something where he's just going to get in trouble. It seems like something where he's like physically being injured by it.
Have they told him that he'll lose his sight?
No, and I don't think they know that.
They don't know that.
No.
I feel like I knew that at this point, though.
I mean...
Well, I knew that it was going to be They said it was dangerous if he's in darkness. So I assumed it would mean blindness or death.
Yeah, at the beginning they said he can't be in dark for more than a couple minutes.
I didn't know if that meant for photography purposes or if that meant for like being alive purposes.
I took it as being alive.
Yeah. Okay.
The next morning, Roddy is being released and tries in vain to punish the officers who didn't believe him the night before. Outside, he finds Katherine waiting for him.
How did you get out?
I have an honest, peaceful face. How come you waited?
Before she can answer, he confesses that he clocked her as Katherine Mortenhoe the night he met her. Rather than driving her away, his confession only inspires her to remove her wig and confirm his theory. We hear Tracey again talking about how Roddy is a supernaturally appealing person, and he's always considered cameras to be an extension of his body before one even was. We cut to Tracey meeting Ferriman in another dark restaurant, and he tells her how popular her ex-husband's new show is and how important. But she has a more pertinent question.
Where's the camera?
What?
Where's the camera?
Can you guess?
We cut to a big box shopping center, and a calming voice on tape advises the store's customers never to steal from them, like a looping superliminal ASMR.
Yeah, it's like it says you'll feel bad if you do.
Don't steal. You'll feel so much better. Don't steal. You'll feel better.
The cashier at the front of the store is watching Death Watch on the in-store television and confesses to Roddy it's her favorite program, not realizing she's talking to the show's cameraman. And the second voice on the show, the guy talking for the entire length of the show.
And that she'll be on the show later.
Right, yeah. She'll be very confused when that episode
release.
comes up. Do you think they include the footage that doesn't have Katherine in it?
No.
Because that would be pointless, right? Roddy returns to Katherine wherever they're hiding out for the night with their groceries. She mentions to Roddy that Death Watch should have started by now, and she wonders how they'll produce the show in her absence. The next morning, she thinks she spent all of Roddy's goodwill and gives him permission to leave, but he makes it clear he isn't going anywhere. She's annoyed with his persistence.
What are you hanging around for?
No reason.
I wet myself. I'm sick! I'm sick!
She calls him a creep and begs him to leave, but he grabs her hard and holds her against the wall until she calms down. He refuses to leave her in this condition or to let her travel alone. Later, she scrubs the urine from her clothes in a river, and they hide out in a boathouse for the afternoon.
Because I feel like it's compelling footage of him holding her, but not from his POV.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So there's some flaws in this idea.
Because it's super blurry of her just like shaking around in front of him.
Just a camera full of hair.
Yeah. She asks Roddy if he can take her to Land's End, where the sea starts. But it's like, what does that mean, really? And other people are also confused by this because they have this recording, but they're like, what does that mean?
And that's another thing about this is like when he's in jail, they can't figure out where he is. They've been following him, his footage. So I'm assuming that they're knowing like routes. Someone's keeping track.
They would
of
know
it.
which police group collected him and where they drove him.
Yeah.
They didn't like put a bag over his head when they took him back to the jail.
But also I just feel like in this level of technology where he can transmit literally from across the countryside.
He can send them high def footage, but not GPS coordinates.
Yeah, exactly. Like they can't triangulate where he is.
Yeah. But I think someone does say when he wakes up in the cell that he's been unconscious for a while, like he got hit and was out. And so I think maybe that's where they lost him because his eyes were closed and they lost their connection completely.
But I thought he couldn't close his eyes without there being consequences.
Well, he didn't close them. Someone else closed them for him with a punch. Back in Ferriman's office, Dr. Mason is panicking that, based on the footage he's seen, her seizures are quite advanced and she might be overdoing it with her medicine. He worries she may die sooner than anticipated. Dr. Mason is demanding they intervene to protect Katherine, but Ferriman pretends it's out of his hands, and the conversation is interrupted with news that Katherine and Roddy have stolen a car. Ferriman has his team phone the car owner to keep him from reporting the vehicle stolen.
So
they know exactly where they are again.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, at least with a license plate, you can look the person up.
That's true.
Right.
So
but you would know where the car was stolen
They have
from.
a general vicinity, I'm sure.
The car is soon out of gas, and Katherine and Roddy start walking the mountain road alone. After dark, they hitch a ride on a passing truck with many other onboard passengers. In the middle of the night, Katherine moans in pain again, and Roddy's eyes well with tears. The next morning, the driver kicks them both out at a borderline where the laws against their entry are dangerously strict. Roddy bribes the man to keep quiet, and the driver accepts the cash but informs Roddy it was a waste of money.
So much? What for? Do you think these people care about Katherine Mortenhoe?
Roddy and Katherine walk a dirt road to Land's End, where the ocean starts. The ocean view is marred with a billboard advertising Poseidon Burials Incorporated. Rest in eternal peace in the liquid blue depths of nature. We can arrange a sea funeral for you. Be buried the Poseidon way. I think the word "to" was just accidentally left off of the billboard. Katherine stares out to sea and tells Roddy that tomorrow they can walk the 2 hours around the cove at the edge of sight. They stop in a dirty, abandoned shack on the shore. She asks if they can sleep together, but just sleep, and he agrees to. Later, Roddy finds her sitting in the sand outside and asks if what they're here for is her first husband, Gerald Mortenhoe, and she confirms his suspicion. Roddy asks if she ever had second thoughts about her illness or if she trusted the doctors implicitly, and she says she feels exactly what they told her she would, and she believes the diagnosis. He asks if it's worse to disappoint someone or to be disappointed, and she says it's far worse to disappoint. Katherine tells the story of a time she and a friend met pygmy tribesmen, and one of them asked if they dream, and her friend said they do, and the pygmy was saddened to learn that dreaming wasn't unique to them.
So there's a lot of these weird little conversations
Yeah.
that I don't quite understand their purpose, and it just seems to be to fill time.
I think this one is an example of disappointing someone being the worse of two options, because he could have said what she says she would have said in the same situation, which is, no, we don't have dreaming. What is that? Can you describe it to me? And it would have made them feel better about themselves. But she couldn't have known that that was going to be his response to finding out that other people dream. We cut for a moment to the editing bay, and Ferriman comments on the blurry picture, blaming Roddy's eyes. One of the technicians in the room admits the show is so fascinating that he's begun dreaming about Katherine. Katherine asks Roddy if he can head to town to buy her makeup so she can look nice for her reunion with her first husband, and Roddy admits a bit of jealousy here. While he's in town, Roddy pops into a hole-in-the-wall bar just in time to catch tonight's broadcast of Death Watch. The episodes are airing a few days behind reality, so he sees the scene where Katherine pisses herself, and he pins her against the wall until she calms down. Everyone in the room is sobbing as they watch. Roddy is overwhelmed by the footage and runs in tears back to Katherine. By the time he gets back to her, it's nearly pitch black out. He screams her name and throws his flashlight into the sea, thinking he's lost her. When she shows up, he panics and begs for help locating the flashlight because his vision has completely shut off.
That's not how I interpreted that scene. I thought he threw the flashlight on purpose, to
punish himself
maybe. because
of what he did to her.
He realized what he was doing when he watched the footage and how he shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
Yeah, that's how I felt.
Which is crazy because the footage is what he saw before. So there's no new information.
Well, but he's seeing it from an outsider perspective. I think that.
But it's not, right? It's from his exact perspective.
Yes, but on a television
Sure,
is different
maybe.
than experiencing it in real life, because I think there's
Or maybe he saw other people reacting to the
that
footage.
too.
Because obviously he can't see his own reactions in his point of view footage, but he immediately regrets this decision.
Yeah. When she shows up, he panics and begs for help locating the flashlight because his vision has completely shut off. She locates it in a tide pool, and he asks her to shine it in his eye.
Turn it on. This way. Flash it here, this way.
Yes,
Go ahead. Go ahead. Right in my eye. Don't worry. Don't worry. Shine it right in my eyes. Go ahead. Damn you! Turn it on! Does soap water run it? Turn it on!
It is on. Who are you?
This is very reminiscent of the scene in Fury Road when the bullet farmer gets hit in the eyes.
Yeah.
It's like, light a flare. It's right in front of your eyes.
The team back at Death Watch home base are freaking out because they've lost the feed, audio and video, and only have enough footage for 2 more episodes tops. Ferriman asks Roddy's ex-wife to be brought to the station. Another of the doctors that they have employed in this reality show experiment, who seems to be like a psychiatrist character.
Yeah, we saw her earlier. She was giving a diagnosis or consulting on Roddy's mind and his state of mind.
Yeah, and now they have her as a specialist for consulting on the whole situation that they're in. And she drops the biggest bomb of a twist into the story in what sounds like a bit of throwaway dialogue. The line is even edited out of the American version of the theatrical release.
Maybe Roddy should have been told she's not dying.
Wasn't dying.
So it turns out the medicine they gave her to manage pain is actually what's killing her, and there was nothing wrong with her from the start. It's bizarre that they would keep Roddy in the dark on this detail alone, considering everything else they've entrusted him with. We don't really see Roddy telling Katherine the truth, but we jump right to him making excuses and claiming there's nothing he could have done and he can't take it back now. He advises her to continue on to her husband's place before the Death Watch team find her here to collect her. Because he's blind and she's not responding, he doesn't even know if she's listening anymore, and when he decides she's left him, he breaks into sobs again. We hard cut to a pair of helicopters tracing the coastline in search of them. It seems like it would have made more sense to be following close behind them the entire time in case they lost their connection to Roddy. We see a quick shot of Katherine leading Roddy down the path to her husband's home, beside the cove, and then we jump to the shack where the cameras in Roddy's head were last broadcasting. They find evidence of the pair, but they have successfully escaped the Death Watch team.
They have so many contingency plans here for this show, but none for Roddy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why didn't we put cameras in someone else's eyes?
Yeah. Or why aren't there hidden cameras all over the place in the city or in her house? Tracey has been brought to the scene as well, and she warns Ferriman that he's right to fear her ex-husband. Ferriman tries to play the victim here. Tracey, this whole thing could be falling apart, as though she doesn't desperately want it to. It's like she does not care. All she cares about is her ex-husband, or possibly husband. We don't explicitly say that they're divorced. We just say that they've at least been separated.
They're separated. They actually I think they do say
later he does.
Oh, okay.
But yeah. The same psychiatrist from the Death Watch party asks where Catherine's first husband lives, and they admit they're still trying to locate him. The psychiatrist mentions the significance of Katherine keeping the man's name, suggesting he is still in some way important to her. We cut now to the home of Gerald Mortenhoe, near the cove, just as Katherine and Roddy are stumbling up to the porch together. Gerald is being played by Max von Sydow, appearing nearly 2 hours into the film for the first time. After introducing Gerald to Roddy, they basically ignore Roddy, and we get a montage of her and her first husband rekindling things by speaking poetically in various languages around the house. Over dinner that night, Gerald asks about the extent of Roddy's blindness, and it is complete. He can't sense color or brightness at all, except the feeling of warmth when he's in sunlight. Gerald asks if he ever considered not going through with the experimental surgery, but Roddy admits that he was mesmerized with the thought of his own visions being documented permanently on film. Never mind that he can never see those moments again, nor can he record any new visions moving forward. He seems confident the doctors at NTV can fix his eye cameras, and Katherine drops a glass, seemingly shocked by the revelation that he doesn't regret taking part in this experiment.
I thought it was because of her illness, because they mentioned that she has trouble holding on to things and drops things regularly.
Okay, I missed that point then. I couldn't tell from her perspective, but it seemed like it was to punctuate what he had just said. Later, we see Mr. Mortenhoe telling Katherine stories, which I don't quite see the point of. There's a couple in a row here that I'm like, why?
I mean, it's a fascinating story, but it has nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, I like hearing him talk, but he plays a record for her, and he says this was written by this guy. He wrote a symphony. A bunch of people got killed. There's like this whole mythology to it, and that he had to like piece together the symphony from what survived this like ancient battle.
Yeah.
And so this is like the spoils. This is the treasure of his life's work, recreating this symphony.
Yeah.
And so he listens to it all the time because it's his favorite piece of music. Then he transitions to a story about lions on the African plain and how they watch things that they're hunting, and the wind is blowing the grass and it's tickling their whiskers, and that's the end of that story. It's just kind of like people expect that this story is going somewhere, but it turns out it's just a moment in time. And you know, we tend to dramatize the events of our lives instead of just appreciating the moments individually. But suddenly his phone is ringing, and he stands to answer it. Katherine looks out the front window at Roddy sitting in a chair outside, and the people on the phone tell Mr. Mortenhoe that they're coming whether or not she's here, so he admits she is here, but he gives her enough warning to leave before they get here. Whoever called also admits up front to Mr. Mortenhoe that she was never sick, and she should cease taking the prescribed medication immediately. This should have been a placebo if you weren't trying to kill her.
Well, I think they were trying to kill her.
I guess.
Did they? I was unclear of whether or not they were intending for the medicine to actually kill her.
Because the doctor seemed terrified of that possibility, and it's like, what was that not the plan?
Well, he
I
says
don't think
that
it was.
Well, the way he phrased it was of like she's dying faster than we expected. So that means
did they think they were going to save her at the last second?
That's kind of how I took it. I took it as in like they just wanted her to feel like she was sick long enough to make a show out of it, and then they were gonna say never mind.
I mean, I'm dancing as fast as I can all over again. It's like, it's not a death watch if she survives. You have to kill her.
And what we've known about Ferriman so far is like, yeah, I can see him doing this.
Yeah. Maybe his plan was to make it seem like, oh, things got off the rails at the end and we lost her.
Well,
but we were gonna save her.
Well, and earlier, when they're behind the mirror, Ferriman says, you know, like how to talk to Katherine about the illness, and he says, "This is my job. I've done this before."
Right.
And I was like, and now I've reflected back on that line after that once we learned, it's like, wait, have you done this before?
Right.
Is that what you were talking about?
But I still think it's weird that they're entrusting like the team psychiatrist and these other doctors with the knowledge that this woman is being poisoned against her will and there's nothing wrong with her, and they didn't tell Roddy that. Like, you can trust these medical professionals whose like licenses are on the line, who are definitely going to go to the press after this woman dies and say you killed her.
Well, maybe Roddy wouldn't have gone along with it. Of all the things.
But why did the doctors? Why did they tell them at all? There was no reason for them to know that if there wasn't a reason for Roddy to know it. The Death Watch team are still about an hour away, and Katherine says she wants to take a bath before they get here. Mr. Mortenhoe invites Katherine to stay here with him forever, but she's not interested in that. He pleads with her in French now to stay with him because he claims to have more courage in other languages. She asks him to go downstairs and put on his favorite record, and he realizes something is off about her. He suspects she's taken the rest of the medication that she was told to throw away and realizes it's too late to save her. On the contrary, she believes that death is her only winning move, since Ferriman will be brought to ruin by her death.
He said it was a mistake, Catherine.
It isn't. Whom are you going to believe? Them or me?
You.
Please go downstairs. Put the music on.
Outside the house, Gerald waits with Roddy for the Death Watch team.
Where's Katherine?
Katherine died a few minutes ago.
What?
Roddy, I want to ask you something.
Ferriman and his team arrive in their helicopters, and Tracey runs to Roddy to take his arm. When he asks for Katherine, Gerald informs Ferriman that she is gone.
Well, did anybody tell her that she's going to be okay? Can we turn that music down just a little bit?
Leave it the way it is and get out of here now.
When Roddy hears Ferriman's voice, he stomps toward it and grabs the man around the throat to strangle him to death. Gerald and Tracey wrestle Roddy away from the man, and Gerald promises to handle it himself.
Yeah, he's like, if you don't get out of here, I'm going to do it myself.
Yeah. It reminds me of that line from The Amateur where he was like, it's not going to bring them back from the dead. And he's like, it brought me back from the dead. Tracey assures Roddy that Katherine has beaten Vincent Ferriman for good.
He's done, Roddy. Don't you know? He's done.
No, he's not dead.
Yes, he is. He's dead enough.
Roddy introduces Mortenhoe to his wife Tracey, and we get a replay of her testimony about Roddy's first day with a camera in his eye and how he walked around and never came home. And we fade to black for the credits to roll.
So I got really mad at this point about all this narration because I thought, okay, at this point with all this narration coming in about his wife, this movie is going to end with Roddy getting a terminal diagnosis, and these are interviews about his death watch.
Oh, okay. So he's season 2?
Right. Because otherwise, I do not understand what these narrations are about. And so when the movie ends, it's like, well, wait a minute. Why were we having all of these weird interviews with Tracey?
Well, I haven't read the book, but my theory would be that this is literally testimony being given at a court case that is Ferriman being brought to judgment for what he's done.
That's a good interpretation.
But I haven't read the book, so I don't know if it goes into more detail about what these little snippets are from. Apparently, when people saw the movie, they were very interested in this medieval French composer, Robert de Boulac. And they went and looked it up, and they were like, where can I can't find it anywhere. Where do I buy this? And they're like, we made it up. It's not a thing.
It's great music.
Yeah.
This whole movie had great music. Very,
yeah.
very, very loud operatic score.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's really interesting. I guess it was kind of a lost movie for a while, but it did get a Criterion release recently. And so it has a really nice Blu-ray. The transfer here is gorgeous. When I first put it on, I was like, this looks so ahead of its time just in terms of the cinematography and everything. And it's just really well done. I was very surprised with it.
Well, I think it's such an interesting concept that I think we see in so many other films after this one that I'm just surprised that I had never heard of this one, considering how many other films have done things in similar veins to this. But, you know, I think this deserves a lot of credit.
I think it also is interesting how not far off from the reality of the present the story predicted the future to be. Oh, yeah. There's a few movies like that where I watch them and I'm like, wow, they didn't get anything like embarrassingly wrong.
Yeah.
And we're probably maybe 10 years from the protesting keeping teachers out of classrooms thing. And we definitely already have the problem of people sitting down with a computer that does most of their art for them. And it was just fascinating that none of it's played to an exaggerated level. It's all just like, no, this is just a thing that happens. It's presented as a very fact of life situation.
Fact, yeah.
And it doesn't get anything drastically wrong.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting. And I think we get amazing performances from all of these people. It reminded me a lot of, have you ever seen the movie In the Company of Men?
I have not seen that one.
It sounds familiar, but I don't think I've seen it.
I never watched that. It made me think about other films that do stuff like this. I've never watched that Robin Williams one, the Final Cut. Does it have a lot of similarities with that one?
A little bit. That's like a guy he goes through the memories of your lifetime and he's like censoring all the really terrible stuff you did from your families. But then he stumbles upon like someone involved in conspiracy stuff, and people are trying to get the footage from him. And
it's like a thriller.
Yeah.
Oh, it's more of okay. Yeah, I wasn't quite sure what the tone of that one was, but I was just thinking about movies where we're sort of recording somebody's entire life. Obviously, like the Truman Show.
Yeah.
Ed TV.
Yeah.
Those definitely draw a lot from this.
I'm blanking. What was the movie where as you're dying you get to see and hear all the music that you want? And we watched it for the podcast, didn't we?
Oh yeah.
What was that?
What's the name of that movie?
Get to see and hear all the music.
Yeah, like
they go into the room and they
project images up on the
lay
screen
down on that
and
table, and
it's like a semi-futuristic movie.
And we watched it for the show?
Not for the show. I think we just watched it.
Oh, did we just watch it for separately? Like the guy wanted to see like green grassy fields.
Oh, wasn't that? Yeah, that was for the show. That was Soylent Green also.
Well, it was Soylent Green.
Is it Soylent
Green?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Soylent Green.
Yeah.
Oh.
I think I was misunderstanding what you were.
Yeah, I just couldn't. I think about so many other things from Soylent Green, not that scene. So that scene kind of stood out.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah. No.
But anyway, as far as Death Watch, for me, I was very intrigued by everything that was happening. It's a little long, and what I mean by that is, and I feel like we say movies are a little long, and sometimes what I mean when I say a movie's a little long is that you can edit stuff out of this movie.
Yeah.
I feel like things like the grocery store scene, all these scenes with Vincent talking about, I guess we're trying to play up that, he's a terrible person. So we have all these.
The daughter thing was unnecessary.
Yeah.
And I feel like some of it is just like, I hate to cut this performance from Harvey Keitel where he's freaking out on the beach, but it's about 4 minutes longer than it needs to be. We could very easily cut it down.
Him going to the store and talking to some kid.
Yeah, that wasn't necessary.
Like there was just all these little things about it that was just like, you could trim. And so, it took me 2 sittings to watch it, but I thoroughly enjoyed everything I saw.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a great movie, and it leads you to think a lot about this stuff, but I think it would have been more impactful with a little less of the extras.
Yeah. It's also the 4th film so far this season to start with the word death. Can you remember the other ones?
Death Trap.
That's one.
This season? I was like, so we're not doing like Death Ship. We're just in this season.
This season, but including 70s titles.
Oh. Death Wish, whichever one, 2.
Yeah.
We watched 2.
And we watched
the first one?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did both. You're right.
We also still have this season Death Valley and Death Scream, unless any more 70s titles have death in them. It's a thumbs up for me, though.
Oh, yeah. Definitely a thumbs up.
Yeah, thumbs up for sure.
Did we letterbox this yet?
I did.
I didn't. Where do you have this on Letterboxd, Jess?
I have this one at 9 out of 46 for the year. I have it below Butterfly and above Victor Victoria.
All right. Richard, what do you think?
I have it at number 7, which puts it below Quest for Fire, but above Venom.
Yeah, that. Speaking of which, R.I.P. Tony Todd, right?
Yeah.
Because he was the voice of Venom.
Not this Venom.
I actually have it in 10th place, which is just under Porky's and just above Death Trap. So my deaths are right next to each other there.
Under Porky's?
I like Porky's a lot. I would watch it again right now.
So close to the bottom of my list.
Our writer-director here was Bertrand Tavernier. He actually started as a film critic, and most of his other directing credits are French titles that I did not recognize. The writer of the novel was David Compton. This was adapted from his book The Unsleeping Eye, which has an AKA of The Continuous Catherine Mortenhoe. No other IMDb credits. The screenplay was written by David Rayfiel, who has a credit on 2 Night Galleries and a Columbo, on the way to his only title we've covered so far, 3 Days of the Condor. Later, he writes the screenplays for The Firm and the Sabrina remake, and he's also credited in the recent 3 Days of the Condor series adaptation, Condor. They just called it Condor. The other writer here was Géza von Radványi, who did all the German dialogue. I didn't recognize many of his other credits, but he is an uncredited writer for Al Adamson's 1964 adaptation of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. The music here came from Antoine Duhamel. He's a regular composer of Jean-Luc Godard's work, including titles like Pierre Le Faux and Weekend. The cinematographer here was Pierre William Glenn, who previously lit Day for Night, Boomerang, and Avalanche. The editor here was Michael Ellis, who previously cut Cross of Iron, Superman, and so far on the show The Godsend. Later he cuts Britannia Hospital, Jewel of the Nile, Little Voice, and The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. The editor here was Armand Pisani, or Seni. He has mostly French titles I didn't recognize. Romy Schneider played Katherine Mortenhoe. Before this, she had played Sissy in the 1950s Sissy trilogy, also starring her own mother, actress Magda Schneider. Mother Magda was also once a guest of Adolf Hitler's at his Berghoff Mountain residence. As I mentioned before, her son passed away before the film's American release, and less than a year later, Romy herself passed away in May of 1982 from cardiac arrest after a kidney operation. So that was like literally months after the American release. Harvey Keitel played Roddy. Before this, he was in Who's That Knocking at My Door, Mean Streets, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, and Taxi Driver for Martin Scorsese. We've seen him so far in Mother Jugs and Speed, Saturn III, Bad Timing, and The Border. Later, he's in The Last Temptation of Christ, The Two Jakes, Thelma and Louise, Reservoir Dogs, Bad Lieutenant, Pulp Fiction, Get Shorty, From Dusk Till Dawn, Moonrise Kingdom, The Grand Budapest Hotel, and most recently The Irishman. Harry Dean Stanton played Vincent Ferriman. Before this, he'd been Tramp in Cool Hand Luke. He's in Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, Godfather Part 2, Alien. We've covered his work so far in minisodes of Wise Blood and Black Marble, and regular episodes Private Benjamin, Escape from New York, and Coppola's One from the Heart. Later, he's also in Paris, Texas with Natasha from One from the Heart, and in Christine, Repo Man, Red Dawn, Pretty in Pink, Wild at Heart, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Straight Story, Rango, and we actually share a credit on one of his last titles with the first Avengers film. Teresa Liotard played Tracey. Before this, she was in Agnes Varda's One Sings, the Other Doesn't, but I didn't recognize much else after this, and her dialogue in this film was dubbed over by Julie Christie, who we've seen now in Demon Seed. Max von Sydow played Gerald Mortenhoe. He began his career working with Swedish director Ingmar Bergman in films like The Seventh Seal, Wild Strawberries, and The Virgin Spring. We've seen him previously, where his career in American film began largely, as Father Merrin in The Exorcist, and then as Jobert in 3 Days of the Condor, and in the 1980s, he's appeared in Flash Gordon and Victory. After this, he's King Osric in Conan the Barbarian, Brewmeister Smith in Strange Brew, Blofeld in Never Say Never Again, an uncredited role in Ice Pirates, Dr. Kynes in Lynch's Dune. He's the voice of Vigo the Carpathian in Ghostbusters 2. He reunites with Stallone as Judge Fargo in Judge Dredd. He's Papineau in The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, Lor San Tekka in The Force Awakens, and his last big thing was his appearance as the Three-Eyed Raven on Game of Thrones. He passed away in March of 2020. Carolyn Langrishe played Girl in the Bar. She has recurring characters on Lovejoy and Judge John Deed, and more recently she showed up as Jasmine Jazz Welker in Tremors 7, subtitled Shrieker Island. William Russel played Dr. Mason. Before this, he was Soren, the lookout in The Great Escape. Vadim Glowna played Harry Graves. Most of his credits were German, but he was Private Kern in Cross of Iron and Herman in Suck My Dick. That's the name of the movie, apparently. Eva Marie Meineke played Dr. Klausen, the psychiatrist character. So far on the show, she was Mrs. Heinemann in The American Success Company. Bernhard Wiecki played Catherine's dad. He was Dr. Ulmer in Paris, Texas, also with Harry Dean Stanton. Robbie Coltrane played Limousine Driver. This is technically his first film, but because it took a while to reach America, he had previously appeared for us with Max von Sydow in Flash Gordon. Sadly, his role in Flash Gordon was previously offered to the original Flash Gordon actor, Buster Crabbe, but producer De Laurentiis retracted the offer and for whatever reason gave it to Coltrane. Later, he's Rune in Krull. He worked opposite Brosnan's Bond in GoldenEye and The World Is Not Enough, but he's probably best known for playing Hagrid in the Harry Potter films. Julian Huff played Young Doctor. He showed up previously as a peasant in Jabberwocky. Paul Young played police officer. Before this, he was in Chateau's Land, and we've seen him on the show as a disco DJ at the Ski Chalet in A Change of Seasons. More recently, he voiced Father Wilfret in the Bard's Tale video game series. David Hobenstock played the boy in the park with the soccer ball. He is the son of Mortenhoe actress Romy Schneider, and as I mentioned before, he passed away in 1981 before the film was released in the US. He is somehow listed as an uncredited assistant director on the film, despite his death at 14. Bill Nighy is uncredited according to IMDb as the Man in the Harriet scene. This would have been his second feature film after an uncredited role as flower delivery boy in The Bitch. We'll see him again next season in Curse of the Pink Panther, and later Mac the Knife, Underworld, Love Actually, Shaun of the Dead, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and then my favorite role of his as Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest. Later he's in Flushed Away, Hot Fuzz, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Rango, Pokemon Detective Pikachu, and more recently he was Longneck in The Wild Robot. Go check it out if you haven't. It's great, from what I understand.
You haven't even seen it. It is great. And take your mother and bring some tissues.
Alan Tall played Demonstrator, uncredited. He was an Elder Stewart in Braveheart. I think that's everything for Death Watch. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share, you can find all our socials at linktree/vintagevideopod. If you enjoy what we're doing, consider giving us a review on iTunes. I don't believe it helps visibility, but it's good for morale. And if you really like the show, maybe you should join our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/vintagevideopodcast to access all of our 70s reviews and have a hand in choosing next month's film. Patrons are currently choosing between Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Black Christmas, The Destructors, aka The Marseille Contract, Emmanuel, Freebie and the Bean, The Godfather Part 2, The Island at the Top of the World, Journey Back to Oz, The Man with the Golden Gun, Messiah of Evil, The Towering Inferno, and Young Frankenstein for a 50th anniversary review next month. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you'll join us next time when we'll be discussing Out of the Blue, which IMDb describes like so. A young girl whose father is an ex-convict and whose mother is a junkie finds it difficult to conform and tries to find comfort in a quirky combination of Elvis and the punk scene.